Telling.
When does Snow White come out? Right, it's soon,
They delayed
right?
it for 2 years.
I know, and it's going to fail.
Have you ever watched a classic Disney movie and felt like you'd been transported to a world of pure wonder? That indescribable spark, the one that made you believe in true love, adventure, and happily ever after, was something Disney virtually patented for decades. Yet lately, it seems like that spark has flickered. Today, it's all eyes on the highly controversial Snow White remake, with online uproar, bizarre casting choices, and one particularly outspoken star at the heart of it all. Strap in. This is a tale of how one of Disney's most treasured stories turned into a social media firestorm. Everyone thought a live-action Snow White would be a sure bet. After all, she's the original Disney princess, the foundation of the studio's empire of fairy tales and dreams. Then, RachelZegler entered the scene, chosen to bring this beloved heroine to life. On paper, it probably sounded groundbreaking, a modern actress for a modern audience. But sometimes, what looks good on a corporate spreadsheet doesn't play out so well in front of millions of fans who grew up adoring the classic version. The casting itself lit the first match. In the original fairy tale, Snow White was described, quite literally, as having skin as white as snow. This detail was central to why she was named Snow White in the first place. So when news broke that the role would go to a Latina actress, audiences were left scratching their heads. Was this a genuine creative decision, or a bid for some diversity points? Disney insisted it was about an inclusive approach for a new generation, but critics wondered if the company was simply checking off the woke box to appease modern trends. Almost immediately, debate erupted online, with supporters praising a broader interpretation of who can wear the iconic red bow, and skeptics calling it a superficial attempt at rebranding a classic. But that was only the beginning. As more leaked details emerged, people realized Disney wasn't just giving Snow White a new actress. They were also stripping out many of the elements fans hold dear. First, the classic romance with the prince appeared to be on the chopping block. Sources suggested that Snow White's dreamy love story, once the crux of the entire fairy tale, was too outdated for modern viewers. Or so Disney seemed to believe. The prince was rumored to be either significantly reduced or removed altogether. Cue the collective gasp from longtime fans who grew up humming, "Someday my prince will come." If that's gone, many asked, what's left of the story that shaped Disney's fairy tale legacy? It didn't stop there. The iconic 7 dwarfs also seemed to be missing in action. Early pictures and behind-the-scenes rumors hinted at significant changes. When the dwarfs aren't even dwarfs anymore, or worse, simply don't exist, you start to lose that whimsical charm. The dynamic of Snow White finding refuge with her 7 unlikely companions was crucial to the original story's heart. They weren't side characters so much as a surrogate family. Without them, you're essentially removing the support system that made Snow White's journey both vulnerable and endearing. All these alterations had fans wondering if the film would be Snow White in name only. Then came the behind-the-scenes interviews, and that's where RachelZegler really lit the fuse. In various clips, she appeared dismissive of the original cartoon, at times making fun of Snow White's love story and outright stating that this new version wouldn't feature an archaic romance. She laughed about details from the set that nodded to the classic film, like apple-flavored snacks, acting as if the very idea of paying homage to the 1937 classic was laughably old-fashioned. The message came across as though she had little respect or nostalgia for the film that launched an entire empire of animation. For many fans, that felt like a betrayal of the fairy tale spirit. The online reaction was swift. People flooded social media with clips of Zegler's interviews, dissecting every remark as proof she either didn't care about the original Snow White or outright disliked it. Some even described it as if she was canceling the essence of Snow White. Others pointed out it wasn't even just her words, it was her entire tone, like she was there to bury the old story rather than celebrate and reintroduce it. Critics labeled her comments tone-deaf and condescending, fueling the narrative that both actress and studio were eager to toss tradition in the gutter. But that wasn't the whole story. Enter South Park, the animated juggernaut with a knack for poking fun at whatever is buzzing in pop culture. In an episode teasingly titled The Panderers, the show took aim at Hollywood's obsession with diverse reboots, and the way studios seemingly flip beloved characters for some quick marketing points. Everyone knows South Park doesn't pull punches. They roasted Disney for turning nearly everything they touch into a political statement, rather than focusing on telling a timeless story. In typical South Park style, they amped the absurdity to highlight how hollow it can look when a franchise tries too hard to seem woke.
Even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible
for this movie to succeed.
By doing their own version of casting changes to established characters, the show served up a gleefully over-the-top parody, nudging viewers to ask whether these big studios actually care about meaningful representation or just want to brag about it on press tours. Meanwhile, RachelZegler's interviews continued to go viral. Some media outlets tried to paint her as a misunderstood actress, caught in a swirl of controversy. Others slammed her for doubling down on her dismissive remarks. The result was a wave of negative PR that overshadowed nearly every discussion about the film. Instead of conversations about how the story might be updated for new audiences, the debate was all about whether Disney had lost its magic formula and how Zegler seemed to mock the original's cherished themes. Fans who adore the 1937 classic accused Disney of throwing nostalgia out the window. On the flip side, certain defenders argued that it was time to move on from old-fashioned tales. They insisted that removing the prince and dwarfs was a way to modernize the narrative. But critics countered, isn't Snow White's entire premise about her bond with these 7 outcasts who become her family? Isn't the prince supposed to represent the notion that pure-hearted kindness can lead to a happily ever after? And isn't the evil queen's vanity in contrast to Snow White's innocence the central moral lesson? Without those pieces, are we even watching Snow White anymore? Or is it just a new fantasy story wearing the old name? Disney, for its part, tried to manage the crisis. After all, Snow White isn't just any princess. She's historically special to the studio, known as Disney's first feature-length animated heroine. The stakes were huge. Maintaining brand loyalty while courting modern audiences is a balancing act the company has struggled with in several recent remakes. From The Little Mermaid to Pinocchio, each time Disney unveils a live-action adaptation, it faces a wave of praise, backlash, or both. But with Snow White, arguably the foundation of the Disney Princess Empire, fans expected a level of reverence that they felt was missing. Skeptics voiced a deeper concern. Maybe Disney is so fixated on fixing older movies for modern sensibilities that the studio has lost sight of what made these stories enchanting in the first place. Romance is labeled old-fashioned. Comedic sidekicks are deemed offensive or unnecessary, and everything has to champion empowerment in the most overt, heavy-handed way. True empowerment, some argue, doesn't require gutting a story's essence. You can update a fairy tale without hollowing out its heart. And then there's RachelZegler's personal PR approach, which seemed to fuel the fire every time she opened her mouth. Fans replayed clips of her dismissing not just the prince's role, but the entire idea of a classic sweeping love story. Many felt she was belittling anyone who found the original meaningful.
That is why we hate the diversity, equity, and inclusion casting and writing in movies.
There were even references to how she demanded higher compensation for wearing the Snow White dress, which rubbed some viewers the wrong way. On one hand, an actor wanting fair pay is standard. On the other, her tone sounded less like genuine concern and more like a sneer at the legacy that put her on the map. People started comparing notes from other Disney stars who took on classic roles. They recalled how Emma Watson approached Belle in Beauty and the Beast, modernizing Belle while still honoring the original's charm. They pointed out how Halle Bailey maintained a love for Ariel even as she put a fresh twist on The Little Mermaid. By contrast, Zegler came across as if she was actively hoping to replace.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie, 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
Place the story, rather than reimagine it. Whether that was her intention or not, the widespread perception was that she harbored zero appreciation for the material. But the question remains, why did Disney let this continue? Usually studios coordinate every single interview and soundbite to keep the narrative upbeat and fan-friendly. Did they underestimate how fiercely people cling to their fairy tale nostalgia? Or did they overestimate the public's appetite for radical rewrites? Whatever the miscalculation, the chatter has been deafening and largely negative.
Promotion leaving Disney facing a brutal loss. Entertainment media offered excuses with Pence.
As the release date edged further away, with delays along the way, speculation grew that Disney was buying time. Some insiders suggested the studio might pivot or re-edit. Others claimed they might bury the project altogether if the backlash got too intense. Still, official updates kept championing the new vision for Snow White, while fans noticed the conspicuous absence of certain classic elements in set photos. The dwarfs were replaced by an odd group of varied companions, prompting yet another outcry that even comedic relief was being sacrificed on the altar of forced modernity. The comedic blow from South Park only compounded the problem. The episode lampooned the idea that every beloved character might be recast into a new form, specifically adult women of color who recite lines about patriarchy. By exaggerating that concept, South Park hammered home that such changes, when done disingenuously, can feel hollow. They showed how quickly representation can start to resemble pandering when it's not handled with sincerity. People took that cartoon roast and directly applied it to Disney, pointing to SnowWhite as Exhibit A. Underneath the comedic jabs, there's a real growing frustration among audiences. It's not that people oppose diversity or empowerment. Most viewers appreciate seeing broader representation in media. The sticking point is when studios seem to chase headlines rather than prioritize storytelling. Each time a cherished character is drastically changed, it risks alienating longtime fans, especially when the new version is drenched in corporate messaging rather than genuine creative inspiration.
On her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Say it louder so your other eye can hear you.
That frustration took on a life of its own when folks started digging into Zegler's other public comments. From social media posts to her opinions about broader culture, she made more than a few remarks that critics labeled holier than thou, feeding the
kind of a Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute, it was riveting, and it's based on
narrative that she was oblivious to the fan base's nostalgia and emotional investment. Before long, what could have been an empowering reinterpretation of SnowWhite turned into a personal referendum on RachelZegler's public persona. The final ingredient in this simmering pot was the swirling rumor mill about Disney's financial predicament. In recent years, some of the studio's attempts at live-action reboots have underperformed at the box office, even if they later broke even or turned modest profits from streaming deals. SnowWhite, as a property, was meant to be a safe bet, almost a guaranteed success. But with each new controversy, fans warned that this reimagined tale could flop, an unthinkable outcome for a brand that used to be the gold standard of family entertainment. It's important to note that not everyone is rooting for disaster. There's a sizable chunk of the audience that believes the movie might surprise skeptics, that perhaps the final product will find a sweet spot between old and new. After all, there were similar worries about other live-action remakes, some of which still racked up impressive numbers at the box office. Maybe there's a silent majority who simply haven't spoken up yet, waiting to judge the film on its own merits. But given the relentless wave of criticism, that optimistic view has been overshadowed by the negativity swirling around Zegler's interviews and the broader sense that Disney has strayed from its Magic Kingdom roots. All of this circles back to the deeper question: what happens when nostalgia meets corporate-driven progress? Are we doomed?
As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot.
To watch every classic get retrofitted to fit a new cultural narrative, regardless of whether the original magic stays intact? Or can these stories be updated in a way that's authentic, respectful, and genuinely fresh? As of now, the SnowWhite controversy seems to point in a discouraging direction, suggesting that Disney might have lost its delicate balancing act between innovation and the timeless enchantment that first made it a powerhouse. Despite the swirling debate, one thing is certain: the SnowWhite remake has become a flashpoint for discussing the difference between genuine representation and performative change. It's shown us that while audiences may be open to reinterpreting classics, they won't stand by quietly if they feel a studio is carelessly ripping out the heart of a story. The enduring love for the 1937 original, combined with the modern appetite for more inclusive storytelling, could have been a winning recipe if handled carefully. Instead, it feels like we're watching a slow-motion train wreck in which the lead actress and the studio keep feeding the flames rather than learning from the backlash. Now, the movie's future teeters between disaster and hope. Some viewers remain cautiously optimistic, hoping the final
I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. I watched it for the first time in
cut might deliver. Others are convinced it will become another cautionary tale for why forcing an agenda onto a classic story can backfire spectacularly. Either way, the interest in this film, whether fueled by genuine curiosity, schadenfreude, or longtime fandom, is undeniably high. In that sense, perhaps Disney's strategy worked. Good or bad, we're all talking about SnowWhite. But if the chatter leads to a box office bomb, it won't matter how viral the discussion became. In a world where studios constantly chase headlines and social media metrics, maybe South Park had the last laugh by exposing what happens when you try too hard to please everyone. You risk ending up with a product that pleases no one at all. If there's a moral to this modern SnowWhite saga, it might be this: If you're going to reinterpret a beloved classic, don't lose sight of what made it beloved in the first place. True diversity, genuine empowerment, and fresh storytelling can all coexist with the essence of a fairy tale, provided the people in charge actually care about the story as much as the press coverage. Whether this new Snow White becomes a cautionary footnote or a remarkable triumph remains to be seen. But one truth lingers. The magic that made Disney so iconic is rooted in sincerity and heart. If you try to replace those qualities with empty pandering, the audience will notice. They always do. And while controversy might get clicks, it doesn't automatically fill theater seats, nor does it capture that elusive fairy tale wonder. So maybe it's time we asked ourselves,
let me just remind you, RachelZegler, of what the map looks like, just so you can understand when your Disney movie is coming out, how many people you are wishing harm upon.
Does Disney still believe in happily ever afters? Or is every classic destined to be reimagined into oblivion? Because if the studio continues down this path, it's only a matter of time before the kingdom they built, and the fans who cherished it, start to slip away. The story of Snow White once taught us about kindness, friendship, and the power of love. Now it's teaching us about the risks of bending a cherished tale so far that it breaks. Will Disney course correct? Or will this be remembered as the moment even fairy tale magic couldn't survive the weight of modern cynicism? After all is said and done, one thing is clear. Messing with the core of a legendary story can be perilous, no matter how good the intentions. Some fans might still hold out hope for a whimsical surprise. Others have already written it off as another casualty of corporate tinkering. In the end, the fate of Snow White's live-action journey rests on whether Disney and its leading star can reclaim the sincerity that started it all. If they can't, it's not just a film at stake. It's the legacy of an icon, and the spark that once made us believe the world of fairy tales was real. And that, perhaps, is the greatest twist of all. A beloved character who once brought people joy and wonder now serves as a cautionary tale for how quickly magic can be lost when a story forgets its own heart. If Disney truly wants to bring Snow White into the future, maybe they should revisit the fundamentals that made her such a timeless figure. Because in the race to modernize, they risk leaving behind the very reason we fell in love with that princess in the first place. Here's hoping they find a way to recapture that shimmer of hope. Otherwise, the next reflection they see in the evil queen's mirror might reveal the uncomfortable truth that even Disney's once untouchable legacy isn't guaranteed a happy ending.